How can you put faith in something in a system like that?
Very good, ma'am. I respect you. We're right on the same page. If I was standing out here saying, put your faith in Christianity, you should say to me, time out. In light of the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, in light of how many white Christians enslaved blacks in America, you gotta be kidding me. And you'd be absolutely right. I'm telling you that if you put your faith in Christianity, you're making a big... It has nothing to do with evolution. Biology is a study of nature and how nature works. And it's a beautiful study. All right? Biology is not based on evolution. Give me a break. Biology is based on observation of life and how life operates. Evolution as an origin has nothing to do with science. Evolution as an origin is a philosophy that behind the process of evolution, there's no intelligent mind, there's just chance and fate. Obviously, I disagree with that philosophy of evolution as an origin. But I've got to be honest enough to acknowledge that even though I accept evolution as a process, there are so many gaps in the fossil record that for me to look this man in the face and say, evolution, that we came from a single cell to today through this mutation, process of mutation, that is so intellectually dishonest.
No,
it's
not.
scary. Yes, it is.
It's not intellectually
There's
dishonest.
absolutely
It is
no
far more
proof.
intellectually dishonest to claim a man rose from the dead 2,000 years ago than it is to claim that we evolved from single cells.
No, that's philosophy. It's a philosophical issue of, do you allow for a supernatural God?
No, because the difference
Obviously,
is that
if there's
there
no
is
God,
evidence for one
dead
and no
people don't
evidence for the
rise.
other.
But if there is a supernatural God, the resurrection of Christ is not irrational. No supernatural God, resurrection of Christ is obviously irrational. It's stupid. If there's no supernatural God. But if there is a supernatural God, it's not irrational to believe that a dead Christ rose from the dead.
We just spent some time establishing how important it is to be objective about evidence, and yet, in order for you to make that claim, you have to establish that a supernatural God exists. How do you do that with evidence? How do you do that by being objective and arguing in good faith? You can't.
By pointing
it's
out.
not possible.
All right,
It goes
then
back
fine,
to this
sir.
whole thing that
If you're going to
you're
ask a
spinning
question
philosophy.
and then answer it by saying it's impossible, I'm going to go on to somebody else.
All right, go
Because
ahead
you're not
and
being open-minded. You're being so close-minded. You ask a question and then you say to me it's impossible.
All right, go ahead.
How is that meaningful intellect? Thank you so much. How is that meaningful intellectual discourse?
I've already said you can answer the question now.
No, but that's intellect. You've shown your dishonesty.
I
You asked a question and you said it's impossible.
I threw the gauntlet down, and instead of answering the question, you've decided to tell me how wrong I was for answering the question first. How about you answer the question now that I asked you?
You agree not to interrupt me?
I apologize for doing that.
All right,
Go
I
ahead.
forgive you. All right. The reason that I believe God exists is because the evidence points to God's existence. First piece of evidence. Order and design point to a designer. If I were to say that this shirt came about as a result of a hurricane passing through a cotton field, that would be ludicrous. Why? Because the order and the design of the shirt points to a tailor, a designer. I am convinced that she has a rational mind. Why? Have I ever touched her mind? Have I ever smelled her mind? Have I ever seen her brain? No, not once. But the evidence of her articulate speech, the evidence of the way she dresses herself in an orderly fashion, convinces me that between those two beautiful ears, there's a rational mind. Similarly, I cannot see God, I cannot audibly hear God, I cannot touch or smell God. But the order and design of the universe, the order and design of the human body, demand an intelligent mind. So that's the first reason that I believe there is some type of God, some type of designer. Second piece of evidence that God exists, moral absolutes. I am convinced that the abuse of innocent children is never, ever good. I am convinced that objectively, the abuse of an innocent child is absolutely evil. The only way there can be an objective moral is if there is some type of moral lawgiver, some type of mind, pre-human mind, who creates and defines the value of human dignity, the value of justice. Otherwise, it's all relative. And that's what you have to believe if you're an atheist, that morality is relative. Okay, I am convinced that, yes, much of morality is relative, but there are at least a few moral absolutes, like the abuse of an innocent child is 100% evil. That demands a moral lawgiver. So those are the two top pieces of evidence for me that convince me that indeed there is some type of God. Does that make any sense?
None of it is actually observable, repeatable, or evidence in any manner of the word. I asked you about evidence, and you gave rational argument. We need observable, repeatable, scientific evidence.
Oh.
Going back to how we talked about looking for facts and all these things, you realize that when you talk about these things, you're talking about providing evidence, but providing nothing but rational argument.
Good.
This is the 2,000-year-old argument that philosophers, empiricists, and rationalists have. Anybody who's taken a philosophy class knows that. It was 2,000 years of argument because nothing of it was conclusive. There's no tie between evidence and rational argument. You need to provide evidence, empirical evidence, in order to support your argument when we're talking about empirical evidence.
I think you've just exposed your philosophy very beautifully. Let me ask you, do you believe that unless you can scientifically prove something, it's not true?
Well, science doesn't prove anything, so you're going to have to rephrase your argument.
Do you believe that unless you can scientifically give evidence for something, that it's not true?
I believe that as a rational being, I would not be thinking in good faith if I accepted a belief or an argument that was not based on evidence that was established by science or any sort of observable, repeatable fact.
Good.
So
that's where you and I disagree.
Right.
I am convinced that you do not scientifically prove or give evidence to convince that George Washington was the first president of the United States. I am convinced that scientific knowledge is beautiful, good. But historical knowledge is also equally beautiful and good, but it has nothing to do with the repeatability that you were referring to earlier. You don't get George Washington back and have him inaugurated as first president of the United States.
If you're talking about history and about George Washington is the first president of the United States. So look at that from a scientific perspective. The reason that we can prove that as fact is because repeatable evidence, eyewitness accounts throughout the years of his terms of service. Like, there were hundreds of people that witnessed him being president. Hundreds of people all witnessing the same event.
Each individual yes.
That's your repeatable evidence
is
right
a repeatable,
there.
Observable
Every
piece of
single
evidence.
thing in history that we say happened historically, we look at and we go, that's why archaeology is such a big deal, because we go to all these different places, we dig these things up, and we look at them, we date them, we figure out where they came from. That's your repeatable evidence right there. There's as much science intertwined with history as there is with anything else.
Sir, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul writes, Jesus Christ rose from the dead and appeared to over 500 people. Many eyewitnesses saw Christ risen from the dead.
How many people wrote the Bible? Who wrote the Old Testament?
Many people did.
But who? Names.
Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel,
Which
Daniel,
books?
Hosea, Joel, Amos.
There's no way to confirm for each individual book. Who wrote Genesis?
Probably Moses.
But you say probably. There's no way to go back and confirm this is the person that wrote it and check the credentials of who wrote it.
Oh, sure there is. And the evidence is Moses wrote the Pentateuch, Genesis through Deuteronomy.
But in order to establish that, you need
And
satellite.
guess what? You do not have to read the Pentateuch in order to find out that Jesus really rose from the dead. In fact, the Pentateuch tells you nothing about the resurrection of Christ. Instead, if you want to find out about the resurrection of Christ, you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, 1 Corinthians. Those are the five most important eyewitness accounts of the resurrection of Christ. 1 Corinthians 15, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John talk very clearly about how Christ died, he was buried, 3 days later he rose from the dead. And over a period of 40 days, he appeared to over 500 people risen from the dead.
But that's only one primary source.
No, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John,
But
Paul.
you just said
That's
that it was
5
all
right there.
written together. Yeah.
Pardon?
You just said that was all written together.
All written together?
Yeah.
No, they're
By the
all
same group of people.
No, those are different people.
Yeah, but
Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Paul are 5 different people.
Is there other evidence that isn't in the Bible, that isn't corroborated, like he said, from the 5 people that wrote those stories in the Bible, that says yes? Like, what about these 500 people? Where are these 500 people?
they don't have their own individual 500 accounts. They are anecdotal. They're secondary sources provided by a primary writer. They are just anecdotal evidence. They're actually not reliable as a historian. You can't corroborate people who just are said to have existed. If we had Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Paul, and 500 other satellite books written in Judea at the time, that all of these people corroborating, yes, Jesus Christ appeared to me and 499 other people, then you start having a cohesive photograph of what's happening in the picture. But we have just 5 sources claiming the same thing. That's just 5 things. On the case of George Washington, we have an entire nation that can corroborate. We have so much history written by so many different people who knew and were there and fought under him and worked with him. All of these different sources corroborate to paint a photograph that he existed. His inauguration was real and it did happen. I mean, in the case of Jesus' existence, there's, like I brought up the other day, the Romans wrote about him. They knew that he existed, but they don't corroborate any of the myths about him, about his rising from the dead, about any of his miracles. They cared nothing for it and heard nothing of it. They knew only that he existed and that he was a major political force in Judea in terms of spreading Christian ideology. That's all that mattered to them. So we can't corroborate that Jesus Christ existed. We cannot, in good faith, corroborate any evidence that Jesus Christ, any of his fantastic claims about him were real or in any sense believable.
Josephus, the Jewish historian, wrote about Christ. Suetonius and Tacitus, 2 Roman historians, wrote about Christ. The enemies of Christ wrote about him in the Mishnah, which is the Jewish commentary on the Torah. They wrote he was a false prophet who performed miracles, but he was in touch with the wrong side. Very hostile references to Jesus in the Mishnah. There's absolutely no question that it's historically verifiable that Jesus Christ lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead.
Wrong. That's not evidence.
Thanks for sharing your opinion.
I mean, the
That's
first
your
3 are
opinion.
right. The first 3 are absolutely true. The 4th one is absolutely a leap of faith that is not based in any sort of evidence, historical or otherwise.
Yes,
There
it
is
is.
no evidence that he rose from the dead.
Sure it
You
is.
have
The
to go there
historical
and see for
record
yourself
points
and
out
take
that the
photographs.
apostles saw Christ. Thomas was not there. The apostle said to Thomas, "Hey, Jesus is risen from the dead." Thomas said, "No way. I'm not going to believe it unless I can see with my own eyes, unless I can take my hands and put the nail prints in his hands." One night all the apostles were together, including Thomas. Jesus stood among them and he walked right up to Thomas and said, "My man, right here. Take your hands and put the nail prints in my hands. Take your hand and thrust it in the spear wound in my side." And Thomas stopped doubting and believed. And Thomas hit the floor and said, "My Lord and my God." Now, what's really important is those eyewitnesses died for what they claimed not to believe. They died for what they claimed to have seen. Matthew, John, Mark, Peter, Paul, all died as a result of Roman soldiers saying, "Acknowledge Caesar as Lord." It's the way we're unifying the Roman Empire. Or else don't acknowledge he's Lord and we'll kill you. And every single one of them said, "We have seen Jesus Christ risen from the dead." And they died, not for a belief, not for a faith. They died for what they claimed to have seen. Study psychology. You cannot get people to die to cover up what they know to be a lie. Will people die for a lie? Of course they will. But they'll die convinced the lie is true. You're not going to sacrifice your life to cover up what you know to be a lie. Those first century followers of Christ said, "We saw Christ risen from the dead," and they died. Not for a belief, not for a religion. They died for what they claimed to have seen, the dead Christ risen. powerful evidence that Christ really did rise from the dead.
But that's not evidence, though. I mean, you have to understand that it's convenient that these people who wrote the book are claiming those things. There is nobody else claiming those things. That's my overarching argument. You can't corroborate what they said, because whether or not they believed it, whether or not they were just political activists, whether or not they were just rebels, it doesn't matter. What they wrote in the book it was goal oriented. They were trying to spread an ideology. You can't use their own account for something that they were trying to accomplish as evidence for what they said. You need to corroborate it with outside evidence, and there's nothing of that exists. Nothing in the world corroborates what they said.
Really?
It's all internal. It's not surprising that 12 of these very important people that followed Jesus around for years got together and created these stories and then wrote them down in their own books, because these guys corroborated. It's not surprising.
Really?
That they worked
Then that
together.
means they knew they lied.
By comparison,
And then the problem is you've got them dying to cover up what they knew to be a lie, because as you pointed out, they just made it all up. The problem, you see, you're not thinking clearly. If I make up a lie, sure, I'll pawn the lie off as the truth. But if I'm going to be threatened with death to maintain that this lie is true, just study Watergate, sir. 3 brilliant American lawyers, Dean, Ehrlichman, and Haldeman, were not willing to go to prison to cover up what they knew to be a lie, the Watergate scandal. How much more unlikely that a group of first-century Jewish Palestinian peasants are willing to die to cover up what they know to be a lie, because as you said, they all wrote it just out of their imaginations.
No, I mean,
That's amazing that you can believe that. I can't have that much blind faith as you are able to.
I mean, you know what a cult of personality is, right? When these people follow a man for years and repeat the same things over and over to thousands of people on their travels, you wonder if they start to believe the things they repeat. You say the same things over and over, you start to believe it.
All right.
People around you start
Good.
to believe
You're
it.
right. Possibly that's a possible scenario. You know why it's wrong?
Why?
Because when you read what the Apostle Peter did, the bravest, most brainwashed guy I would think you would point to, he denied knowing Christ 3 times before Christ was executed. What did all the disciples do in the Garden of Gethsemane when Christ was arrested? Were they brainwashed followers? No. They all deserted Christ. They hightailed it out of there. What about Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 closest believers in Jesus? What did he do? He betrayed Christ for 30 pieces of silver. You see, sir, all these scenarios you're painting have some plausibility, but if you think carefully through them, they are ridiculous. Peter was not a hoodwinked, brainwashed guy. He denied knowing Christ 3 times. But after the resurrection, when he saw Christ risen from the dead, he went, whoa!
how can we be sure? Like, how can you justify using it as historical evidence when there's so much other stuff in here that, by virtue of it being connected to this, like, lowers the percentage of possibility that this is in fact historically true, or at least is not exaggerated?
You bet. It's very simple. In order to get a diploma from Texas State University, you have to learn to distinguish scientific literature, mathematical formulas, psychology, history, literature, poetry as unique, different literary styles or genres. If you take a biology test the same way you take a test in poetry, you will flunk out of this place. So you have to learn how to distinguish between different literary styles. Otherwise, you will flunk. When you go to the Bible, you've got different literary styles. You've got Psalms, the book of Psalms. Psalms are all poetry. You've got the Gospels, which include parable, hyperbole, allegory, and historical narrative. If anybody ever writes a history on me, they're going to record some of the stories I told, which are not true. They are symbolic stories, analogy, allegory, metaphor. As a thinking person, you have to allow an author or a speaker to use symbolism in the form of analogy, parable, simile, metaphor to make their point. If you're so wooden in your thinking that you say, I'm sorry, I just have to have the history of this guy, I can't have anything that he said symbolically, That's sad. That's intellectual dishonesty. So, read the Quran, read the Bible. Intellectual honesty, which means you pick up their different literary styles, historical narrative, poetry, apocalyptic literature, parable, simile, metaphor. That exists. That's the way you have to read any book, not just the Bible. It's the way you have to read any that Jesus Christ didn't encourage skepticism. They are wrong. Because at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves." He's pointing out, good and evil are so intertwined in this world that if you're not a skeptic, you will be a gullible fool who will be ripped off. So you better never blindly believe. Instead, you better demand evidence of reliability before you trust. And if some little kid comes up to you and say, "I've been to heaven and back," you better not believe him. Before you ask, really, what's the evidence? The same thing with Jesus Christ. I'm not going to believe that there's eternal life in heaven just simply because Jesus said it. I'm going to demand, because I'm a skeptic, that Jesus give me some evidence that he's reliable, that he's credible. And when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you will discover that the way Jesus treated people, the content of his ethical teachings, like do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the way he died, loving and forgiving his enemies at the moment of his most excruciating pain, and the way he rose from the dead points to Christ being not a wacko, it points to him being totally in touch with reality. So if a little boy says, "I died, went to heaven, and came back," you better not just say, "Oh wow, I believe that." You will be burned. If anybody talks to you about the way to life after death, you better be skeptical.
How can you say the Bible is any different from any other book of myths about any other religion?
Good question. When you read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you will notice they do not have the literary style of mythology. Instead, they have the literary style of historical narrative.
What would you say the literary style of mythology is?
The literary style of mythology has to do with not too concerned about time, not too concerned about physical location. Instead, it's highly imaginative. That's mythology. Historical narrative is concerned about time, place, who were the people around to witness this event take place. And when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll notice that's the literary style employed by them. But when you read the Vedas and Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita of Hinduism, you're confronted by mythology. No problem. I have no problem with mythology. You can communicate truth through myth. But let's be honest, it's not an historical claim. The avatars of Hinduism.
So you view the Bible as a historical text?
Well, that's what it clearly claims to be. It clearly claims to be an historical text, as does the Quran. And the evidence is the Quran is a very reliable presentation of what Muhammad taught. And if anybody's going to come up to me and say, Muhammad was a myth, I'm going to have to look them in the face and say, I'm sorry. Muhammad was not a myth. He was a man who lived from 570 to approximately 632 AD. And he's not a myth. He's an historical space-time person. And the Quran is a very careful record of what he taught. Does that make sense?
I just don't understand what you came out here and what you're trying to do. What are you trying to accomplish?
I am trying to introduce you to the closest friend I have, Jesus Christ. I am trying to introduce you to the closest friend I have, Jesus Christ. Why?
I was raised Methodist for 16 years. I have been close with that. And what education have you?
What education do I have?
Yes, sir.
Well, I got a Bachelor of Arts from Davidson College in North Carolina. I got a Master of Divinity from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Not that that means anything, right? I mean, who gives a rip about my education, really? But you asked, so I answered you. But you see, ma'am, I'm not standing out here saying the reason you should believe in Jesus is because I do. I think you'd be a fool to believe in Jesus because I do. Rather, the reason to believe in Jesus is because you've read the Gospels, you've seen that the evidence is he is reliable in a way that none of the options are. That's why putting your faith in him is so wise. So man, like it or not, you have faith. You're living for something or someone. Now, ask yourself, what's the evidence that what I'm living for is true, is reliable? Let me give you some options. Maybe you're living for your intellect, your rational powers, okay? And there's some evidence that you better trust your reason. That's good. But to put your ultimate faith in your rational powers, in light of how many mistakes I've made rationally, in light of the fact that my mind could easily be hit with dementia or Alzheimer's, in light of the fact that my mind will definitely die one day and be over and gone, gosh, I don't think that ultimately I should trust my mind. Why do I get an education? Because I need to grow my mind. Because there are other people who are more intelligent than I am. And that's why I get an education, to develop this mind. To put my faith ultimately in my mind in light of how many mistakes I've made, I don't think that'd be very wise.
What about in light of how many mistakes religion has made? How can you believe in something that has the Holy Crusade, that has its justification for so many different types of racism, so many different types of prejudice, so many different... How can you put faith in something, in a system like that?
Very good, ma'am. I respect you. We're right on the same page. If I was standing out here saying, put your faith in Christianity, you should say to me, time out. In light of the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, in light of how many white Christians enslaved blacks in America, you gotta be kidding me. And you'd be absolutely right. I'm telling you that if you put your faith in Christianity, you're making a big mistake. But if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, that's radically different. For Christ never called for the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, or slavery. Instead, Christ called for us to love God and to love each other with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Christ attacked racism in his best-known parable, the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. A Samaritan helped a Jew, and there was all types of racial tension between Jews and Samaritans. So you're absolutely right. To put your faith in Christianity is foolish.
How can you distinguish Jesus Christ from Christianity when the story of what Jesus Christ supposedly is spread through what Christianity is as a religion? How can you distinguish between those two?
Good. By having the intellectual open-mindedness and honesty to go to the source documents, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Find out, what did the eyewitnesses hear Christ say? What did they see him do? Get a good understanding of who Christ is, and then either reject him because the evidence is he's a liar, or put your faith in him because the evidence is he's true. Go to the source documents. Let me give you one quick example. I was hiking on the Appalachian Trail with my wife. Suddenly a man started walking behind us. We fell into conversation and I asked him, what do you think about Muhammad? He said, all I need to know about Muhammad is 9/11. That's narrow-minded bigotry. Just because some jihadists fly jets into the World Trade Center in Manhattan tells you nothing about Muhammad. Tells you a lot about those jihadists. If I'm going to be open-minded and honest and find out about Muhammad, I got to go to the Quran, the source document. And I've got to read, what did Muhammad teach? How did he treat people? Is the evidence that he's reliable? Or is the evidence that he's not reliable? Same thing with Jesus. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, sir. I get that you have a logical reasoned argument for this, but I just don't agree with it.
Okay, good. That's fair enough.
I
Why?
at least appreciate.
Why?
I've spent my time growing up in a Methodist church my whole life, and by the time I went on mission trips. I got to be about a junior in high school,
Right.
and the more I thought about it, the more I thought this logically religion does not make sense. And as soon as I thought that, everything about it collapses. This idea of a higher deity, it's starting to be proven that creation is possible, the creation of the universe, it's possible to come from nothing as a result of like dark matter. I'm not going to pretend like I know, but I was reading about that. this idea of religion, why are we any different from apes or monkeys? Why do we have a religion that we need to explain the creation of the world? I appreciate that you're well reasoned and logical, but I just can't agree.
Fine,
Just
I
as a
respect
result of
that.
what I believe.
I respect that, but ma'am, listen to what you're saying. Because you're reminding me of some scary people called conservative, narrow-minded Christians. Don't go that way, ma'am. Instead, think. And you got to think logically, you got to think clearly. So you better know why you have chosen another view of reality than Jesus Christ's view of reality. You better be able to explain logically if you claim to be a logical thinking person. If you say to me, the reason that I can't accept Christ is because when I began to think about it, it didn't make sense. Fine, I respect that. But if you're going to say that, then it means you're committed to thinking, you're committed to a system of thinking that makes sense. So you'd better be able to provide the other system that's better than Christ.
In what way is Jesus Christ any more real than Athena or Zeus or Poseidon? In what way is he any more real than Siddhartha or any prophet, any mythology, any story like that? Why is Christianity the one that's true?
You bet.
That's what I don't understand. Any Indian myth, any Native American, any Mexican story, anything like that that has to do with religion and creation, I see no logical reason for why one is better than the other. It's just all an explanation. Same pattern, a group of people that don't understand the world. They have a creation myth and a god and a deity and something to worship to give their life meaning. And I can't follow that.
Okay, ma'am, you're living your life on faith. I'm living my life on faith. Meaning by that, the basic issues of what's the purpose of life? Why are you and I valuable as human beings? What is right, what is wrong, our ethical system, and do we have hope for life after death or not? All of those issues you have to answer because you're a living human being. I have to answer because I'm a living human being. None of us can prove that our answers are true. But because we're rational people, we better have evidence that what we are living for is true. And if you present me with evidence that an option to Christ is better than Christ, I better be humble enough and smart enough to reject Christ and to follow the option. Similarly, if I can show you that the evidence for Christ is superior to the evidence that supports whatever it is you're living for, and I obviously don't know what you're living for because you've not told me, then you better be willing to say, you know something? I think I jumped too fast in rejecting Christ. I think I better go back and not consider Methodism in the Methodist Church. Instead, I better go back to the Gospels, the source documents, and read about Jesus. What did he teach? How did he live? How did he die? Did he rise from the dead or not? Does that make sense?
Okay, but are you asking us to look for the evidence and believe in the evidence, but you're also telling us to base this off faith? And those are two different things. If you have faith, then why look at the evidence? When you have evidence, then why the faith? You're kind of contradicting yourself within that statement.
Very good. Can I prove to you that he's standing here? No. I can't prove to you that my eyesight is perceiving reality. You can't prove to me that your eyesight picks up reality. Okay? So I can't prove to you that he's standing here. Right about now, I have to decide. Does the evidence show me that he's standing here? Yes, it does. Therefore, my fist had better stop right there. Can I prove to you that my taste buds are telling me the truth when I drink sour milk? No, I can't prove it, but the overwhelming evidence is my taste buds do tell me whether the milk is sour or not. That is why when I drink sour milk, I spit it out, because my taste buds tell me not good milk, sour milk. So, sir, the whole idea that a human being bases their life on proof is a lie. Hopefully, though, as thinking human beings, we don't jettison our minds just because we can't prove something. Instead, we look for evidence. Sir, my brother transplants kidneys and livers at Duke University. He is a very highly trained, talented scientist. He has the honesty to point out the vast majority of my research is not based on proof. It's based on evidence. The papers that I write that are published are based not on proof, they're based on evidence. So the question is, what are you living for, and what's the evidence that what you are living for is true, whatever it is? That's what I'm pleading for you to do. Does that make sense?
I mean, it did until you started talking about proof and evidence, because proof is evidence, and like you're talking about those are two different substances. I'm talking about evidence and faith, because if you have evidence, you don't need faith.
You bet. Let me define it. If I can prove something, it means I can show you there's no other alternative possible. This is proven. No other alternative possible. I can't do that. There's always an alternative that's possible. All right? That's the way my mind works. I observe reality, be it history, science, psychology. To prove something, for me, is impossible. Now, within a neat mathematical equation, can I prove to you that 2 + 2 = 4 and not 5 and not 3? Yes, sir, I can. Can I prove to you that the law of gravity works 100 times out of 100? Yes, sir, I can. Right? But even that, epistemologically, in terms of the theory of knowledge, you got to be real careful with. Why? Because of Einstein's theory of relativity. What you see is contradicted by that theory of relativity. So if you say, well, my proof is based on what I can see, be careful. Is light wave or particle? It's both. Well, how can it be both? Pretty hard thing to wrap your mind around. So just be careful with this idea of proof. It's really perverted in our culture. That is why I lean towards saying evidence. The evidence is that if you go to the top of that building and jump, you're going to hit the ground 100 times out of 100. It's a natural law. Is it possible at some time in some way that a person could jump off that building and not hit the ground? Well, sure, it's possible, but it's so improbable that I can't accept it. See, so for me, knowledge comes down to evidence, not proof. What's the evidence? That's good science. Sir, do you think that if Texas State University is here 100 years from now, they're going to be teaching the same thing in biology class that they're teaching you today? Sir, if they are teaching the same thing in biology class 100 years from now that they're teaching you today, this place will go out of existence.
They were teaching natural selection 100 years ago in every respected university across the world. So certain things don't change with time when certain facts have been established. Facts like evolution, they don't change. Our understanding of the details only changes. Our clarity of the subject is what changes, not the actual facts themselves. So when you talk about evidence-based discovery, over time you're falsifying theories that are being, or hypotheses that are being posited forward, and over time our collective understanding of the facts of reality become more factual, more aligned with reality. It's our collective agreement on what the facts are as established by evidence. That is how we come to understand the universe around us. The only reason we know that you're going to hit him or that somebody's going to hit the ground is because as a society we've all agreed. We all agree that our observations line up with reality. I can't prove to you anything like you've said, but we can agree on what the evidence shows us.
Good.
And the evidence shows us that natural selection is a fact, right? Natural selection, evolution, genetics, these are all facts of reality. They haven't changed for 100 years. They've only been clarified. So, I mean, you have to really confront that. I mean, if you're talking about arguing in good faith from an evidence-based standpoint and being objective, you have to confront the fact that science directly contradicts a lot of what the Bible and including the New Testament speaks of. So that's what I have to say on that.
In the 1960s, Arno Penzias discovered the Big Bang. 1960s. I can promise you, ladies and gentlemen, that radically changed the study of astronomy, the study of the age of the universe. In the 1960s, due to the expanding universe, discovering that, due to background noise, Arno Penzias won a Nobel Prize for nailing down the Big Bang Theory. I can promise you, sir, science had better be a continuing process of changing one's understanding of the universe based on new evidence. My brother does research in transplantation at Duke University over in North Carolina. I can promise you, sir, he is consistently going back to presuppositions, questioning them, looking at new evidence, putting together new theories, making new discoveries to help the human body not reject a new kidney or a new liver that's been transplanted into them. Science is a continuing study of learning more and more accurate truth about reality. If you think that science is some static thing that just remains the same for thousands of years, I feel sorry for you. It's my only point. I never said that science has shown that the law of gravity doesn't work. It's not my point. My point is science is a continuing study, growing knowledge of physical reality. And it better be changing because we don't have it all right now. And if you think we have a cure for cancer right now, you're really whistling Dixie. So we better do good science and discover why do these cancer cells proliferate. We better grow with medicine, with science.